at the end of our lives, what are we going to be asked? How did you serve others? When did I see you, Lord? Well, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was a stranger, did you welcome me? When I was naked, did you provide clothes? Whatever you've done to the least of my brothers and sisters, you've done for me. That's the standard. That's the standard. So each and every day I try to hold myself to that standard. And when I'm talking like that really authentically, I'm not trying to convert anyone else. I'm trying to say, this is who I am. Who are you?
Welcome, everybody, back to the Pay It Forward podcast. I am one of your hosts, Austin Seaworth, along with my co-host, Keegan Walls. And today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Tom Thibodeau. Tom is very well known locally for being the founder of the Masters of Servant Leadership at Viterbo, and really is just an amazing example of a servant leader, teaches on servant leadership. Servant leadership is one of the core purposes of why we started this podcast. So to have somebody like Tom here today to deep dive into what is servant leadership, how it's played a role in your life and the role that you've played in others, we're very excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a privilege to be in the presence of such good young men. No, this is really important. The reason that you have elders in society is to invest ourselves in the next generation. I'm just so sick and tired of people my age in their 70s going, oh, young people these days. Oh, young people. Have you heard that? Yeah, I tell you what, I was back in the 60s. We weren't so hot. Oh, young people these days, look what the two of you have been able to, the three of you have accomplished by bringing together people to share their ideas, the thoughts that they have about what is it we can do to contribute to a greater good. That's what servant leadership is, bringing people from different perspectives together for a greater good. The term servant leadership was kind of coined in the 1970s by a man by the name of Robert K. Greenleaf, who at that point was the vice president of training and development, HR, at AT&T Corporation. AT&T Corporation at that point was the largest corporation in the world. Greenleaf had an engineering background and was able to convince AT&T that buy the second large frame computer produced by IBM. The first went to the Defense Department, the second to AT&T, where Greenleaf were researched in terms of their training and development, and after 25 years of research came to the conclusion that the people that were the most effective leaders, the people that had the most significant impact on others and the community, were people who were willing to serve. And so he was asked, do you have a definition? And people oftentimes are asked, well, what does this mean? And I think this is so contemporary, written in 1970 or 50 years ago, and he writes this. Because of your service and leadership, are people healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants and leaders? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Well, when I first read that in 1974, I thought, this is how I want to live the rest of my life. And so that's what I've tried to do, try to be faithful to that. Well, it's not something that I read out of books. It was the way in which I was raised. It's the family that I came from. Austin and I have this marvelous connection because of my cousin Jerry Janduza, whose mother, Janet, was my mother's youngest sister. And what's really extraordinary is that in 1937, my grandfather was killed by a trolley car in Milwaukee, leaving my grandmother, their mother, with 5 children under the age of 11. She's a single-parent businesswoman in the midst of the Great Depression. She'd get up in the morning, make breakfast for the youngest 4, give them over to the care of the 11-year-old, my Uncle Dale, and then take her baby, my Aunt Janet, Jerry's mother, down to her shop, put her in a crib, and would cut hair. At 10 o'clock, she'd stop to nurse her baby, and then had a friend of hers who had given birth to twins who was not strong enough to nurse her own baby. So Grandma nursed 3 babies at 10, at noon, at 3, and 5, and then went up and took care of her children. The strength of that woman, the strength of our ancestors. And so when I talk with people about servant leadership, what kind of work did your parents do? What kind of work did your grandparents do? What were the sacrifices that they made so that we can have the lives that we have today? And it's just rather extraordinary because they were committed to us. They were willing to make sacrifices for us. And I think now it's my turn. How is it that I'm willing to kind of give back? Service is love made visible. And so often we take the service of other people for granted. Just a moment ago, we were laughing about milking cows and my being a moving speaker, speaking on a PDP podcast. But think about it. Where does our food come from? Think of how hard people work to provide a gallon of milk, how hard people work for a pound of beef. Think about it in terms of our own living conditions. The people who get up at 3 o'clock in the morning in a salt truck to make sure that the roads are safe for you and I to drive to work on each and every day. Think about it that our police department and fire departments have people ready to serve us 24/7, 365, so that we're never without protection or somebody to call. Think of right now the number of young people your ages that are serving in the Middle East, trying to maintain that world peace. All those people who are at service on our behalf. Oftentimes what has taken place is that we take other people's service for granted. People feel like they're invisible. So you've known people who have waited tables. You know people that have bus tables who have been bartenders. They work all night long and customers don't even make eye contact. You become invisible because you take their service for granted. For many of us, how about the janitors or the people in terms of maintenance who clean our floors, wash our windows, make sure that restrooms are clean? Do we ever stop to think about the work that people do so that we can be more comfortable? It's rather extraordinary. Think about this for just a moment. One of my uncles was a plumber. Who is more responsible for stopping the spread of disease, doctors or plumbers? And you begin to recognize that all of our lives are predicated on the service of other people. So I look in terms of both of you. You are involved in a service industry. Everybody wants good service. Who chooses to be the servant? And that there is in the rub. Dr. Martin Luther King said this: everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb degree to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics and physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. A heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. Well, that's what I see in the three of you. You have hearts for service, heart for the future of this community, creating possibility for others through your podcast and your business, leading with power at your church, wherever you are, trying to make other people's lives just a little bit better, and never forgetting about the people who don't have enough to eat, a place to sleep, or spend most of their days by themselves. This is our challenge. This is our challenge, and never has been more clear, a clear difference between servant leaders and self-serving leaders. Servant leaders, I go to work each and every day because I'm committed to the growth and development of other people. Self-serving leaders, what's in it for me? Privilege, power, and prestige. And that's a real distinction, and people choose who they will follow. And what's really amazing is why I'm interested in talking to the three of you gentlemen. You won't follow a dictator. Command and control is done. You have to be engaged. You have gifts, talents, abilities. What's my role is to help you see your goodness. So the way in which I really describe myself, I don't describe myself as a servant leader. I'm an ambassador for goodness. The only thing that changes any situation is when good people get together and do good work. Do you know of another way? You ever see a group of cynics get together and say, oh, let's plan a Little League team? No. Group of skeptics, come on, let's have a free clinic? No, the only thing that changes any situation is when good people get together and do good work. And I see this all the time. I'm also a founding member of the Place of Grace Catholic Worker House over 919 Hood Street. We have a pantry and we serve a meal every Thursday from 5 until 6. It's a community dinner. Everybody come. Everybody gets a place at the table. The understanding of being in good company, like I'm in good company right now, is the people that you share the table with. Kumpanos, the people you break bread with, to be in good company. What happens in terms of being in good company? You have the expectation that I'm going to be fed and that other people are going to be fed as well. Well, isn't that what we want in terms of our organizations and our communities? That people are taken care of, that they're fed physically, emotionally, spiritually, given opportunity to be in good company. And so that's what we do at the Place of Grace. And we welcome every person as if they're Christ himself. No questions asked. We don't have any written records. Whatever we have, we give away. And it's just rather amazing. When you treat people with dignity and respect, what happens? People treat you with dignity and respect. I don't know. I think that'd be a pretty good baseline for us within every business and every community, every family, every school, that everybody is respected for their God-given dignity. So what I try to do each and every day is just remind people of how good they are. Try to remind people of what we are capable of each and every day. Why? This has been given to me for a lifetime. When I was 7 years of age, I went to a Catholic grade school in Wisconsin Rapids. We had moved from Milwaukee to Wisconsin Rapids, so I'm in a new school. First grade, we had what was called the Baltimore Catechism, and Sister Mary Ann, the teacher, would come in and say, "Class, why did God make you?" And then you had to memorize it and then repeat it. And at 7 years of age, this is what I learned. Why did God make me? To know, love, and serve God in this world and the next. Well, I'm 73 now. What do I try to do every day? Know, love, and serve God in this world and the next. Service is love made visible. Service is love made visible. And I am just so fortunate, so grateful to see that lived out each and every day. Being here with the three of you this morning is really a source of hope. Your goodness permeates this room. And I realize that it doesn't stay here. You're sharing it with so many other people. Thank you for the good work you're doing.
Thank you for being here, Tom. That you mentioned love a lot, right? So when people think of love, people think of a feeling, an emotion of being in love with somebody. That there's different kind of love in servant leadership. Maybe go into that. What does love mean in servant leadership?
Well, love's a choice. Love is a choice each and every day. Now, the Greeks had at least 4 words for the word love, and they had a love of others, brotherly love, philia, like we got Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. So that kind of experience that we can have with our friends, and we extend it to each other. We want the good for each other. That's why in terms of the love in this room, you are good friends. How important that commitment is. There's the importance in terms of having self-love. And this is kind of it's not selfish, but self-love. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so when I see people that are overwhelmed, burnt out, stressed out, I ask them, what are you doing to love yourself? It's very significant. I cannot give what I don't have. I can't express to others what I hope for them if I haven't embraced it in terms of myself. So one of the things that happens, well, again, in terms of age right now, I want to reflect your goodness back into your life. Because you and the members of your generation, who's your worst critic? Yourself. And so what's the role of leadership? Is helping people to believe in themselves. That level in terms of self-love. There's also a sense that there's a passion. You love your work. You love your community. There's a level of passion for what is it that we do, or we can direct it. They call that in terms of pathos, a passionate kind of love. You see that in terms of sports. People love the game. You're joining into the passion. What's the opposite of pathos? Apathos, apathy. The greatest obstacle that any of us face is indifference. When people are not engaged, whether it be in the workplace or a neighborhood or in terms of our community. I mean, this is really important because you have to have a passion. Whatever you pay attention to, you get more of. So I always like to ask people, what brings you alive? What are your habits? How do you start each and every day that says, here's a new start? What's your passion? What directs you? And that's what really becomes important. Passion drives purpose. Purpose drives performance. So very early on, what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? What is that brings you alive? And then all of a sudden you begin to recognize this is your purpose, and it leads on to your performance. And then finally, the love of agape, the love of God. A love that's so transcendent that you can't even begin to recognize it. How about the number of people who donate organs for a complete stranger? How about people who take in people who have no place to live? How extraordinary is that? How about people who, we have a man who comes to the place of grace, calls me once a month, the first of the month. Hey, Tom, what do you need? I say, Phil, what you brought last month? And he fills up his car with groceries and brings it to the place of grace. And he thanks me for giving out this food. It's a way in which I can give back. He's 83. He says, God has blessed me. I want to bless others. Thank you for allowing me to do this. I mean, it's just at that level in terms of mutuality, in terms of what we are capable of. Well, we see this all the time. People are willing to sacrifice their life for another person. Greater love than this has no one to lay down their life for a friend. How many parents do that? How many times have you seen an older married couple? One of them has dementia and the other one takes care of each other. A marvelous little story a friend of mine told that a friend of his has been married for 50 years. So they're in their early 70s and looking forward to a wonderful retirement, had worked hard all their lives. And his wife had dementia, Alzheimer's, and she needed constant care. And he had 1 hour a day off where a neighbor woman would come every day from 2 to 3 so he could get out, do grocery shopping, go out, have coffee, just have a little bit of a respite. And he called another friend of mine and said, could I have coffee with you? And then he began to tell the story. He said, this isn't how we envisioned our lives after 50 years of marriage. And he said, for the first 6 months, I was kind of bitter. I wanted to travel. I wanted to do things. I wanted to be more social. But I couldn't because I needed to take care of my wife. And then about the 6th month that it came to me, 50 years ago, I promised, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, till death do us part, I do. And then he said, how many times in this lifetime are you able to fulfill a promise of love? That's agape. That's agape. And you see people making these kinds of commitments all the time. That's the good news.
Yeah, that's great. And you talk about passion and having passion, and is passion something that like where God calls us to something we gives us that passion, or is that passion something that's developed? Like I think of somebody who's just working a job to get a paycheck to feed their family, and they may not be passionate about their job, but they're passionate about providing for their family. Is that something that, can you develop passion for something, or do you have, if somebody is saying, hey, I'm not really passionate about this, should they be doing that?
Well, you have to kind of discern, what is it that brings me joy? And then sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Sometimes we have to do things that are unpleasant, but it's for the good of others. But it's what is it that brings us life? What is it that brings us alive? And what's amazing, oftentimes when you find people that feel like they were not recognized or appreciated in the work that they did, they oftentimes found ways outside of the world of work to kind of reignite themselves. Just rather amazing. Do you enjoy spirituals? The black gospel spirituals, where that came out of is slavery. And the slave owners would go to church on a Sunday morning, and their black slaves would take their blankets down to the creek and get the blankets soaking wet, and they would hang them on ropes in a quadrangle, and that's where you get the 4-square church. And because wet blankets would absorb the sound, then they began to sing of their experience. They began to sing of the Spirit. Well, what did that do? That lifted their spirit so they have the strength to continue to do the work of being a slave. And I look at that when people kind of, what is that thing that renews our spirits and helps us kind of to move forward. Well, that's the work of passion, that pathos, helping people to kind of come alive.
And then for you, have you always had this passion for servant leadership, or where did it kind of stem out of? Maybe younger years you weren't as passionate about it and you had a moment where all of a sudden you had like a revelation of this servant leadership. When did it become this primary driving force in your personal life?
Thank you for asking. Sometimes we choose things and sometimes things happen. When I was 12, my mother was pregnant with my youngest sister. I'm the oldest of 6. Our pregnancy was difficult, and so they moved her bed down to our family room. And for the last 3 months of her pregnancy, she taught me how to cook and clean and iron and sew. These are skills I still have. I can't pound a nail. My family would not buy me a chainsaw. I had to buy my own because they were afraid I'm going to hurt myself. Really, I am just not skilled at fixing anything. I only can do 2 things. I can talk and I can cook. Well, what happened is that my mother, after giving birth to my sister, went into deep postpartum depression. At that time, they called it breakdowns, and she was brought to a psychiatric hospital. Well, I dropped out of school in the 6th grade. I cooked, I cleaned, I ironed, I sewed. But a 6th grade boy can't do that forever. We had no family in Wisconsin Rapids. So my dad had to ask members of our church if they'd take us in. Isn't that kind of amazing? I always ask people that in terms of your churches. Do you have 6 people in your church who would take in another man's children? Not knowing for how long. Had my mother broke her hip, they would say, well, she could be gone for a month. But at this point, it's depression. They had no idea. So my father asked us to ask these different people that would take us in. On Sunday, he'd pick us up and bring us to church. And as one time a week, I'd see my dad that we could connect during this time. And I'm staying with a boy who's a year older than I am, and he's constantly in trouble with his dad, middle school and whatever. And kind of think there might have been a little alcohol involved in terms of his dad, and his dad would come up at night and yell at him. Well, I'm in the kid's room, and so I kind of feel like I'm getting yelled at as well. I'm a 12-year-old boy. I'm a stranger in this house. And one night I can remember I'm lying in bed and I'm looking out at the window and at the stars and at the moon. And I just started to pray, dear God, please take care of my mom. Please take care of my dad. Please bring our family back together. And at 12 years of age, I can remember this feeling of warmth, of love. And I knew at that moment that my prayers were listened to. So at 12, I became a person of prayer. About a couple weeks later, I'm with my dad. We're just by ourselves. I said, who's taking care of Mom? And he says, psychologists and psychiatrists. He said, what do you have to do? I said, what do you have to do to become a psychologist and psychiatrist? He says, well, psychologist, you go and you get your bachelor's degree in psychology, get your master's degree in counseling. And psychiatrists have to go on a medical school. At 12 years of age, I decided I want to be a person of service. I wanted to help people who are helping my mom. I got my bachelor's in psychology, my master's in counseling. And all my life, I've been serving other people who are less fortunate. Whatever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me. And then finally, my mother comes home after 13 weeks. We're all happy to see her, but she's still in a weakened state. And in 1961, nobody talked about mental illness. We don't talk about it today. My mom was in and out of psychiatric hospitals, and nobody once asked me. Everybody in town knew, but nobody once asked me. They didn't know what to say, so they didn't say anything. You've had those kind of experiences. You've known people that have hard traveling, and you don't know what to say, and so silence is just really deafening, if you will. Well, no one talked to me about it, but for the next 6 weeks, casserole showed up. Monday through Friday, somebody had put together a food tree. And every night, we'd get people understood that this woman who had had some hard traveling, suffering from depression, probably couldn't care for her family, so did what they could to help take care of her. I was literally fed by the community. Now it's my turn. So for a lifetime, since 12 years of age, I've been a person of prayer, a person of service, and somebody who believes in the power of community. So wherever I get invited, be it Leading with Power, The Place of Grace, Viterbo, speaking to business leaders, this is who I am. This is what I commit myself to each and every day.
That's incredible. Tell us more about the work you're doing at Viterbo and the Masters of Servant Leadership. And I mean, it's clear this is who you are. You're not teaching it through theory, or like when Jerry came on the podcast, he was like, I can't believe they teach entrepreneurship in college, and the professor's an employee of they're never been an entrepreneur, but they've read books on entrepreneurship. But you are a living, breathing example of servant leadership, and you teach it. And I don't think that you have the correct letters behind your name to be teaching. Is that correct? That I was reading an article that do you have your PhD?
I never finished my doctorate, and then the university gave me a title, Distinguished Professor of Servant Leadership.
But it's who you are. You don't need that. You don't need the
exactly. Like I tell you, I'd never say I'm a servant leader, but I do like to say like I'm an ambassador for goodness.
Yeah. So tell us about the work you've done at Viterbo and where this degree came from.
Well, it was interesting. It goes back to 1994. I'm one of the founders of the master's degree in education, so I've been traveling all over the Midwest since the early 1980s teaching teachers. And I developed a course on the spirituality of education. It's the spirit of the people that you're working with all the time. Who do people we do business with? They have a good spirit. They're attractive. You know that they're good people. How do you do business, Chet? You're a young guy, but how do you do business? It's the old handshake. If I can't trust your handshake, I better get myself an attorney. Why? Why? Because no, really, you know this in terms of you've been burned sometimes, but it's generally in terms of the spirit of people. How do you call that forth? Redemption has happened. The Holy Spirit lives within people. How do you call forth the Spirit? So I've been that's the teachers. And so we had a new president who wanted to develop some other master's programs and said, Tom, would you like to develop a master's degree in pastoral ministry? I said, no. I said, the church has too many masters in pastoral ministry. See, the gospel. John 13. I just love those guys. John 13:6, who show up at the golf. There's that master's degree. They're in the end zone of the Super Bowl. Right? What does it say? God so loved the world. God didn't so love the church. God so loved the world that he's sending us. I said, that's what we need. We need a program in servant leadership to bring Sunday to Monday. We said, never thought of that. Abraham Heschel was a Jewish rabbi, said, our task today is not to return to the catacombs. Our task is to remain holy in the skyscrapers. Both of you in business right now, you can take shortcuts. You're bright enough to get around. To invest as little as you can in rental properties, but you wouldn't do it. Because your faith, your commitment, your integrity wouldn't allow you to. But people who do. All of a sudden, those people who have never brought Sunday to Monday. How is it you bring your deepest held values to the work that you do each and every day? We spend 66% of our adult lives at work. How important to understand that this is where we live out our deepest values. It's in the workplace. Now, so in 1999, we got a grant from the sisters to begin a master's degree in servant leadership, and I started putting together a curriculum. I called the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership in Indianapolis. asking if I could use the term servant leader. They said, well, no one's ever asked us before. I said, you mean there's no masters in servant leadership? Not in the world. We are the first ones in the world. About 10 years ago, a university in Canada started a master's degree in servant leadership, but we're the only ones in the country.
Still to this day?
Still to this day. Every once in a while, you get a couple of classes here and there, but we developed a whole curriculum around it. And what we do is that we have titles for classes that you can't find anyplace else. I'm kind of proud. I'm not really a big tech guy, but you Google servant, prophetic leadership, and they're my classes. You Google rituals and celebrations, there's my class. No other class. I mean, it's kind of, you gain a little Google space. Well, what happens? You're doing something other people aren't doing. Well, this is what's really important. Rick Kite has developed a class in terms of building community. Most MBA programs or business programs, team building. Everything's about team building. Well, no, it's not just about your team. It's about how do you build up a community. That's the good work that all three of you are doing right now. Is that you're bringing to people who have ideas, thought leaders, and you're sharing the ideas broadly. Why? In order to make the community a better place. We have no idea who's listening to us today, but we're not doing it to kind of impress other people. It's just in terms of building up the common good. He has a class on ethical decision making. Well, how important is that in this day and age? In the complexities that you face in terms of a business or politics, you have to have a process in which you can kind of bring people together to come to decisions that are good for the many. And then I developed a course on prophetic leadership. Well, it's the nature of social entrepreneurship, looking at what needs to be done that has not yet been done in the world. And so what we were talking about, my cousin Jerry, and you had a chance to interview him, not only involved in terms of business, but Make-A-Wish Foundation, taking the skills they learned of business and then applying it to a nonprofit organization that is literally changing the lives of other people. To be a social entrepreneur, well, that's what prophets saw. They had a vision of what could possibly be. And so this is not something that we're inventing in the 21st century. How arrogant it is to think that visionary leadership has only existed now in our time because of technology. I remind you of Ezekiel, Isaiah, Micah. I mean, people whose voices we continue to hear from the past. Gandhi, Confucius, words of the past. This is how you might live. So then I teach a class on ritual and celebration. Well, it's like this. If I asked you, how does your family celebrate birthdays? Well, you have one every day. Every year we don't do that. How about anniversaries? Well, it's just another year. How about Thanksgiving? Well, it kind of gets in the way of deer hunting, and a pack.
For Austin, for sure.
Yeah. And then how about Christmas? Well, you never know what to get people, so we just send gift cards. If you told me that about your family, what would I say about your family life?
Not very fun.
Not very fun and not very engaged. Well, it's the same thing in terms of every organization, every community. Or like I like to tell people, never trust a group that doesn't party. Well, we're really, I don't have to convince you to work any harder. But in terms of moments of joy, we have college-age students right now that are still lamenting the fact that they didn't have a high school graduation. They didn't have senior homecoming. They never had a prom. They lost out on that. And you saw the same things during COVID. Isn't it amazing? It was only 3 years ago, and how we've been able to shut it out of our memory. But 3 years ago, Pete, you see in the paper, a celebration of life will be held later. It was never held. People lost. There was no way in which we suspended parades and gatherings of any kind. And so what happened, it exacerbated our sense of loneliness. Rituals bring us together. Celebration brings us together. And what's the role of a leader? Is create those rituals and those celebrations. This teaches us how to gather in the sacred moments of our lives. This community. Why is it such a wonderful community? Look at all the ways in which people get together. Oktoberfest, Riverfest, Lobsterfest.
Cajun fest.
Cajun. No, really, festival foods. You know, the idea of let's come together and to celebrate. And what is the celebration for? Not just for the people that are there, but for the good of the community. It's very extraordinary. Working at the place of grace, realize if you don't have much money, you're not going out for dinner. You're not buying a pizza. You're not inviting people over. You're not going to a movie. So what happens? I always see my brothers and sisters from Place of Grace at fireworks in Riverside Park, at our parades, Rotary Lights. The community Thanksgiving dinner in this town where 4,000 people are fed, or on Alaska community dinner where 2,000 people are fed, and now Holman community dinner where over 1,000 people are fed. The community comes together to celebrate. Let's leave no one behind. See, look at the celebrations. Look in terms of your own church. You know how important it is to have good music and celebration that bring people together. Same thing in terms of our nation. The 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day, national holidays, President's Day that are coming up in this next month. So the importance of ritual and so leaders in every organization, how do you celebrate? How do we recognize each other? And it really becomes important. And deer hunting, ritual, deer camp, and it gets passed on from generation to generation. You build a culture. Well, what we're trying to do in this community, the culture of the Cross community, is to build a servant-led culture. That what we are doing is for the good of others. We just experienced Rotary Lights. When we first started, there were 3 food pantries that got food from Rotary Lights. Salvation Army, Place of Grace, Our Savior Lutheran. How many food pantries are in La Crosse right now? 42.
Are you serious?
And the community comes together to enjoy the lights, to enjoy the park, but it's a ritual celebration to feed our brothers and sisters who don't have enough. And so you begin to recognize it. This is in terms of our rituals point us the way in terms of goodness, and it helps. Well, this is what servant leadership is. It's not just taking the things that we would take for granted, but taking the obvious and practicing them each and every day.
We actually celebrated Rotary Lights, I think 7, 8, or 9 times because my son just loved Rotary Lights. So he just turned 2, and so I mean we could have got away with just going to the entrance, and then there's that big star at the top. That's all he cared about. Even to this day, he just wants to go back and watch videos. He just wakes up and goes, "Big star, big star." So Rotary Lights is awesome. But I want to kind of go back a little bit on a couple things that you touched on. Maybe you didn't touch on them obviously to everybody else. But when we talk about servant leadership, it's oftentimes it's like a value plaque, right? People say it, but when we take anything of value, like here's our mission statement, anything in terms of like a broad scope, it remains that. It just remains a plaque on the wall. Can you talk about, for yourself or what you teach, taking that broad scope? Because it's really easy to say, I want to be a servant leadership, or I want to be a servant leader, but then actually like refining that down to daily discipline. Because I think any personal values we have, if they're just a broad, right, we're just in the world of social media, everything's just this broad, I want to be an entrepreneur. But if it never, I want to be this, I want to be that, I want to be a servant leader. If it never trickles down to daily discipline and actually walking it out every day, it just remains a vague, ethereal idea. So can you talk about, like in your own life or what you've seen, how do we make, okay, people are listening, I want to be a servant leader. How do we take that and funnel it down into actual daily discipline? Because without the daily discipline, you aren't a servant leader.
Right. Well, I love this quote from Dorothy Day. A concept always remains abstract until it costs you something. It's got to cost something. There has to be some level in terms of sacrifice. What it means, I put aside my own ego and how do I serve the needs of other people? Well, where that first has to happen is with my own family. And I would have to tell you with a level of regret and remorse that early on, as a young man trying to build my career, I think I neglected my family. I was gone too much. I missed too many birthday parties or dance recitals because I was teaching other people how to teach children, you know. And I have to be honest with that. So the first place it says in terms of is looking in a mirror. How am I living my life each and every day? How am I serving my wife? How am I serving my daughters? How am I serving my community? Putting the needs of my students in front of my own. That's first level into the self-awareness. It's an internal. And then I begin to act on it. Whatever in my heart, I begin to act. Whatever you pay attention to, you get more of. And so when you just change your perspective, how I can serve other people, you look for ways to open doors for each other. Isn't it interesting? One thing we all do across the globe is open doors for each other. And how important it is to open a door for each other and look at the eyes of a complete stranger. Well, isn't that what you're doing in your work each and every day? Trying to open doors for other people, finding a safe place to live that's affordable, finding a house that's the beginning of a dream, putting on a podcast that says, these are ideas that are worth, you're trying to open doors. So it's the way in which we perceive ourselves, we perceive our life, and then to live that out. And I see this in the people who come to our programs, and they just are extraordinary in who they are. Extraordinary. So let me just tell you a story. So we got a call about 12 years ago from Pastor Kent Johnson, Lutheran pastor, that a young woman from Rwanda had showed up at his door. She had come to this country from Rwanda to learn English. She had only been here for 90 days, but had to get into another academic program or had to go back to Rwanda. He had met her sister at Luther College, and when he was a chaplain, and now he's here. And so her sister had given Kent's name to her sister. So here she is in La Crosse. Calls Viterbo and said she's got to get into a program. She had a bachelor's degree already that she had gotten in international law in Switzerland. And so we brought her into our master's program in servant leadership. She didn't have enough money for tuition, so people in servant leadership began to have house parties and raise money for her. One of the women who was in the program had a spare bedroom. She could come and live there. And then finally, another couple at UW La Crosse brought her in. They had heard about her in her church and gave her a place to live. She graduates from Viterbo, goes back to Rwanda in order to teach servant leadership to the women. After the genocide in Rwanda, 60% of the people in Rwanda are women. And now they have to kind of carry the country. And she begins a nonprofit for women in business. Obama goes to Africa to meet young entrepreneurs and meets Rosine and invites her to the White House. I've never been invited to the White House. For the work that she's doing with women, teaching them leadership, building up small businesses in Rwanda. All right? Because of her work, she gets recognized. She's the Assistant Secretary of State in Rwanda. How does that happen? In our first class, I remember I have students memorize a poem. She said, Mr. Thibodeau, I don't know English that well. Can I recite my poem in French? I said, that'd be fine. She knew 5 languages. All of a sudden, all we did is create this level of opportunity. One of the people in our program is the executive director of the Ho Chunk Nation Education Program, Ryan Crane, an extraordinary young man. Get him on your podcast in terms of his own life story. It's just remarkable. And what does he do as the education director? Has organized and formed a board that is going to launch the first Ho Chunk library. When Ho Chunk children were sent to residential schools, the first thing that happened is that they took away their language. They weren't allowed to speak in English. And now they're going to have books that are written by Ho Chunk in Ho Chunk for Ho Chunk children to learn about their And here's this young man who has 2 small children, 4 and 2, taking on this leadership role to say, this is for the good of the nation. He was a trustee for the Ho-Chunk Nation, was at a reception in the White House. No. His heart turned towards servant leadership when he was working as a waiter at the waterfront and was mentored by Don Weber. From the waterfront to the White House.
There you go. If he comes on, that's the name of that episode.
Well, yeah, okay. And so who is he comfortable talking to? The bartenders and the waiters. And who are the bartenders and waiters talking to? All these people that are coming from all over the world, because everybody's comfortable with the waiter and the bartender, particularly if you don't know anybody else. But he's got this marvelous sense of hospitality, and is taking what he's learned and putting it into action. And there's one person right after the other who is taking what is it that they learned. Another guy works for a manufacturing plant, a middle manager. Oftentimes in organizations, we only allow training for top executives. You have to give everybody in your organization training and development. So he writes this marvelous book on servant leadership from the middle. How important is that? He's a manufacturer, never wrote a book, but decided this is what his calling was. How to take care of other people who are working in manufacturing who had not given the opportunities that he was given. And I see this happening time after time after time. People taking what they've learned, getting the encouragement of the community, and then sending them forth. This is what happens in the early church. You understand the gifts, the charisms. Everybody has a gift. What are the gifts for? For myself? No, my gifts are for the community. My gifts are to build up the community. Your gift of fatherhood. I want to just remind you of this, Keegan. Being a dad is the most important work you're ever going to do. Other people talk about it, being a business person, podcaster, and that's all well and good. But being a dad is so important. That's your gift. And what is it? Why you add that gift? To build up your family, to build up your community. And then what happens when you get built up? What do? You send each other out. Yeah, and that's that process. And so this is what we do in a very real way. My role for 27 years, I've been at the Place of Grace. Before that, I helped to found Habitat for Humanity in town. Before that, during this time, I was founding of Bridges of Belonging for people with different abilities so that they can live there for the rest of their lives. So I have to move from group home to group home. So my life has always evolved. What is it I can do to serve?
That's wonderful. And so you speak around the country on this servant leadership. So talk maybe a little bit, just explain like what that's like. I mean, the servant leadership thing that you founded here locally, but you have used that to go and share it, and I think like around the whole country, right?
Right. When I mentioned about services is love made visible, when I talk about how all of us, our lives are predicated on the service and sacrifice of past generations, that resonates with people. The people who do not resonate with it are people who are arrogant. The people who think, well, I've done this all on my own. Well, I can't change that. You'll find people that I run into that are cynical, but they don't like me because I'm too joyful. No, it really is. Well, I'm not going to be a witness of despair. I want to just say something really, really significant here. You know what's epidemic in our country amongst young people? Suicide. What are they seeing in the older generation? What are they seeing in people like myself? Do they see hope? Do they see people believe in them and support them and want the best for them? One of the turning points in my life was 9/11. And at that moment, I'm looking out at my class, 18, 19, 20-year-old people, and they're scared. They told me, Tom, we used to watch this on video games, now it's real. And I saw the fear in their eyes. Luckily, I had a man in class who had just been working at the War College for the Pentagon. He's coming back to get his degree. And he stood up and he was able to tell the students what their government was going to do to keep them safe. I was hoping there would be somebody like that with my own daughters who are going to school in Madison. But at that moment, I'm 50 years of age, and I made a commitment. I've had the best that this country can offer. I have a family that loves me. I've had good teachers and coaches. I have lived in a community where I have always had clean water and affordable food, and I live a place where I've been safe. I live in a marvelous community that has provided all kinds of opportunities for my children. Do I not have a responsibility to make sure that your generation has the same access to opportunity that I've had? And I challenge people my age. That's our job. That's what moves us forward. At the end of our lives, what are we going to be asked? How did you serve others? When did I see you, Lord? Well, when I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was a stranger, did you welcome me? When I was naked, did you provide clothes? Whatever you've done to the least of my brothers and sisters, you've done for me. That's the standard. That's the standard. So each and every day I try to hold myself to that standard. And when I'm talking like that really authentically, I'm not trying to convert anyone else. I'm trying to say, this is who I am. Who are you? So that we can be in dialogue in terms of level of mutuality. Hello, brother. Hello, sister. Hello, fellow being. What can we do together that we could never accomplish alone? And people seem to resonate with it.
That's incredible. So, Tom, you talk about like give, serve. But you also mentioned that you have to have it within you to be able to give. And if you're always giving, always serving, always saying yes, what does someone need to do to make sure that they're always filled up as well?
Hold on to your chairs right now. All right. Okay. I'm teaching a class right now. I've been following this guy from the University of Pennsylvania who began this 3 years ago. And it just, the first time I read about it, I said, I'm going to do this. And he teaches a course called Live Like a Monk. And
Is that's what's the name of him? I think I've
McDonald, Paul McDonald.
Okay.
He grew up Catholic, lived as a Buddhist monk for 3 years. Now he's teaching at the University of Pennsylvania. Well, when I was in college, I was in pre-monk training. I thought about becoming a monk. Poverty, chastity, obedience, I could do that. Silence, probably not. Well, anyway, so I have this class because I'm really concerned about this. People talking about being overwhelmed, anxious, depressed. Well, is there another way in which to live? Well, really there is. It goes back to the 2nd century in which people saw the craziness of what was taking place in the Roman Empire, and they went out to the desert to pray and to reflect. The desert mothers and the desert fathers and other people began to join them in these communities. And these communities still exist today. So I'm teaching this class now called Live Like a Monk. And I said this, to join in this class, these are what you have to do. 1, limit your access to alcohol, processed food, and refined sugar. 2, you have to be committed to 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep. 3, you have to spend an hour a day in contemplation, reflection, meditation, or journaling. 4, you have to spend an hour a day in physical labor. 5, each and every encounter with human beings, you must enter into humbly and joyfully. In order to continue to do the work, you have to have a disciplined life. You can't just go to bed when you want to go to bed. You can't just fill your head with everything that's on a phone. Phones aren't healthy for us. We know they're not healthy for us. You keep your phone in case something happens to your little boy at daycare. That's the most important thing. But the rest of the stuff is purely fluff, really, quite honestly. And then you begin to recognize how technology can take over every corner of your life. So one of the things I do, I spend a lot of time in solitude. I spend a lot of time in terms of quiet. For as much time as I spend with people, I need a corresponding amount of time alone. So after leaving here, I'll go over to the place of grace. Nobody's there right now. And I'm going to make soup for a class on Monday. From 11 to 12, I'll be quiet. So I live a disciplined life in that way. I spend time each and every day in prayer. Dr. Martin Luther King was asked a question, Dr. King, why do you spend 4 hours a day in prayer? There's so much work to be done. And he said, if I didn't spend 4 hours a day in prayer, I couldn't do the work. So it's really in terms of how is it that you're nurturing your soul? Walks in nature, sitting down and eating with my wife. I can only do two things. I can talk and I can cook. I can't fix nothing. She's got the tools in our house. I order from QVC, knives. Okay. But the understanding is this, what are your gifts? How are you using them? But an overused strength becomes a weakness. So I can't be giving all the time. I also have to receive. Let me tell you one last story. We must be getting close to the end, and I don't want to go over. And this is very, very important, and it was taught to me by my mother. I told you earlier how my mom was in a psychiatric hospital. And on Sundays, my dad would pick us up and take us to church. And then when it was appropriate, take us up to Marshfield to see my mom, about 30 miles away. And most of the time we'd go over and see her, and she'd been crying. She's dealing with depression, sadness. And this one particular day, she's smiling. She was happy. She had gone for a walk with 3 other women. And one of the women, her dad lived in Marshfield. And she said, let's go see my dad. So these 4 women walked over to her father's home. And her dad was so happy to see his daughter and her friends. He said, I just baked some homemade oatmeal raisin cookies. And he runs back in the kitchen and he shows the platter to his daughter, would you like a cookie? She said, oh no, Dad, I had too much lunch. Would you like a cookie? The second woman, I'm trying to cut back. He said to the third woman, would you like a cookie? She said, no, I really couldn't. And my mother said, I watched the man's face and said, would you like a cookie? He said, can I have 2? Can I take 2 with me back to the hospital? And he ran back in his kitchen and they put 2 oatmeal raisin cookies in a napkin. And she handed me the napkin and she said, son, please remember this. It's in giving that you receive, but it's in receiving that you give. What if it's all 4 of us been taught? That God's love is unconditional. But we have to have humility and the grace to receive it. Your opportunity, your hospitality, your willingness to listen to me this morning, what a great gift. But what we'd offered is as gift. And so when I find myself, I live with this level of gratitude that everything that I have is gift. Just a gift.
Wow. Incredible wisdom, Tom.
Yeah, that's just a funny topic because we discussed that, the pouring out, because we're in a culture full of, and I might even, get rid of this part, but this is free. But we're in a time where it's always boundaries, okay, how do I stay filled up, like what you're saying?
Yeah.
But it's this misconception because, like you said, giving. How do I fill up? I have to be filled. I believe as a Christian, like I have to be filled by the Holy Spirit. That's the only way. Like I know what's in Keegan. What's in Keegan by himself is dry. It's bad. It's selfish. It's arrogant. I have no good in myself apart from Christ. So I have to be filled up by Him. But often we're trying to, I think, self-store all this stuff so that I have energy to go out, and it's not true. Like Paul says it in 2 Timothy, I pour myself out daily. Like that's what he does. I pour myself out daily, and I know my time's coming to an end. He knows. He says, like, I know my time is coming, but I pour myself out daily. Well, if he's pouring himself out daily, what does Paul also say? Be ye continually filled. Like it's not just when I receive Christ, I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, and that's just one time. He said it's the like in the Greek and stuff. It means to be continually refilled. Well, how can I be continually refilled with the Holy Spirit if I'm never pouring out either? And so we have this view on boundaries and all this stuff of like self-preserving all this stuff. Well, am I just self-preserving my own self in a sense? Or am I pouring myself out daily as a servant leader? Am I pouring myself out daily and then doing, as you would call it, the monk habits of being filled again with the Holy Spirit so that I can pour out again? Otherwise, I'm wrestling with this idea of, if I'm always just trying to hold on to myself and I ask, Holy Spirit, fill me up, like, am I like a cup that's just filled with Keegan? And does the Holy Spirit actually have room to fill me up so I can pour out him, which is the only good I can do anyways? And so I think that's a interesting concept.
It's a level in terms of mutuality. I read this the other day. I love this. One of the first things that Jesus says when he comes out of the desert is what? He calls fishermen to help him with his work. What does that mean? That God invites us to work, to be parts of salvation. And if you read those guys, they're pretty much like numbskulls. They had no idea. No, really. Listen, they're fishermen. And the only time they catch fish is when they're with them. You know, I mean, you know, but it's a level in terms of willingness. There's a level of mutuality. We need each other. So when you went and looked at the star at Rotary Lights, were you filled up as much as your son, or was a look on your son's face that filled you up?
That was my son's excitement.
There's a level in terms of mutuality that takes place. You're sharing it with your son, but your son is reflecting that back to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so we cannot be so arrogant. Oh, I think I got here by myself. No, the only reason I'm here today is by the grace of God and all those other people, like my grandmother, who made sacrifices that I could have the life I have today.
Yep. I think that's as the Christian, maybe the great pride or arrogance of, we think we're very good. I can manage my own life. We think we have great life managerial skills, but we got to lay it down because we are not good managers. So I think we do got to ask this last question, which is, who founded? Like, where really does the idea of servant leadership come?
Jesus. In business, nobody even argues with it.
I know. We were talking.
You know, you know where you get the argument? Is in a church.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know what I mean? What, really? It's Jesus. It's the Last Supper. You know what I have done? So if I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you must wash each other's feet. And you'll be blessed if you do it. Come to be the servant.
Thanks for being here, Tom. That was really, really good. And
Where, if somebody's interested in being a part of your program, where can they go to find out?
Viterbo University, Viterbo. Oftentimes people think it's a terrible university. You ask Google about Viterbo University, it's a terrible university. No, Viterbo. But yes, that's where we are. And just for everybody, just recognize the servant leaders in your lives today. I think that's what becomes significant. And thank them for their service, their leadership, their goodness in our lives.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it was an honor for us to be able to hear from you and learn from you, and we appreciate you coming.
Well, thank you. I'll come back anytime you want.
Sounds good.
All right, it's recorded, so we'll hold you to it.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. We sincerely hope that you found value in today's episode and learned at least one thing that you can take back and implement into your lives and businesses. As always, we appreciate your support and hope you can all find a way to pay it forward this week.